Did you all bring swimsuits? My son asked, dragging two giant coolers through the front door. The ocean's perfect today. I froze, one hand still on the doorknob. I had bought this beach house to enjoy my retirement. Quiet mornings, soft waves, coffee on the porch. I hadn't expected a crowd. But there they were, my son Ethan, his wife Miranda, their two teenagers, a barking golden retriever, and four of their friends carrying beach umbrellas. "Surprise, Mom," Miranda sang out, kissing the air beside my cheek. "We thought we'd make it a family getaway." Family getaway. I smiled politely, though the word getaway felt like a small invasion. "I see," I said softly. "Well, welcome everyone. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The living room smelled of sunscreen and salt water as they unpacked. Towels and sneakers landed on the couch I just had cleaned last week. The little place that had felt serene now looked like a summer camp. I stood by the window, watching the tide roll in. For months, I'd imagined peace here, finally having time to read, to paint, to breathe. I'd worked 42 years as a teacher before I could afford this dream home. But dreams, I've learned, can become noisy. Ethan's laughter echoed from the kitchen. "Mom, you won't mind if the guys crash in the guest room, right? We'll take the couch if we have to." "The guest room?" I repeated slowly. "You mean the one I use as my reading room?" "Yeah, that one," he said, already tossing pillows on the floor. "It'll just be a few days." A few days. That phrase has ended many of my boundaries before. By evening, the grill was smoking on the back deck. Someone had turned up the music. Miranda and another woman were making margaritas in my blender, past the one my late husband used to make smoothies every Sunday morning. I could almost hear his gentle voice. "You'll love the quiet, Ellen. The sea will heal you." But the only thing loud enough to hear now was the bass shaking the windows. "Mom, come join us!" Miranda waved from the deck. Her gold bracelets clinked in the light. "Don't be such a hermit. This place is amazing. I still can't believe you got it for only 300 grand. She said it as though it were a prize she'd won. I sat at the edge of the deck, watching seagulls dip and rise over the water. Later that night, after everyone went to bed, I walked through the house, turning off lights. The hallway smelled like beer and sunscreen. My sandals stuck to the floor near the kitchen. A pile of damp towels sagged over a chair. In the guest room, my reading room, someone had left the window wide open. The breeze carried the ocean smell, but also the faint sound of laughter outside. Ethan and Miranda were sitting on the beach, their silhouettes framed by the moon. I watched quietly through the screen. Miranda leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder. "Your mom's lucky," I heard her say. "If this were ours, I'd rent it out all summer. Do you know how much this place could bring in?" "Maybe she'll let us," Ethan murmured. "She doesn't really need all this space." Something inside me tightened. Not anger yet, just the early pull of realization. The next morning, I made pancakes and coffee as if nothing had happened. The teens were already on their phones talking about bonfires and jet skis. Miranda strutted in wearing a sun hat twice the size of her head. "Morning, Ellen," she said brightly. "Oh, we found this cute beach rental company online. They said houses like this can bring in up to $6,000 a week during peak season. Isn't that wild?" I poured syrup over the pancakes. "That's interesting," I said. Ethan chuckled, not looking up from his phone. "Maybe you should let us handle the booking for you, Mom. We could list it and manage everything. You'd hardly need to do a thing." My hand tightened around the spatula. "Handle the booking?" "Yeah," Miranda said. "We just need temporary access to the deed information, for verification. It's totally safe." I looked at her, at the woman my son had married, who never said please or thank you, but called me sweetheart when she wanted something. "I'll think about it," I said. When they all headed to the beach, I stayed behind. The house was finally quiet again. The air conditioner hummed softly. I walked into the small study where I kept my paperwork. The folder with the house deed was still there, untouched. I traced my name on the cover, Ellen Marie Brooks. Outside, the laughter of my family drifted through the open window. I remembered buying this place 2 years ago after my husband passed. I'd stood right here, imagining peaceful mornings, his voice still echoing in my memory. "You've earned this," he'd said when we toured the house together. "Promise me you'll enjoy it." I had promised. By evening, the few days had turned into maybe a couple of weeks. They'd invited neighbors over for a barbecue without asking. The deck was crowded again, and my son's friend had parked his pickup truck halfway on my lawn. I brought out a tray of lemonade and set it on the table. Miranda flashed me a grin. "See, Mom? You do love having people around." I smiled faintly. "It's lively," I said. When they laughed, I noticed how little space there was for me at the table. Someone had taken my usual seat near the corner, where I could see the water. I stood instead, pretending to enjoy the sunset. As the sky turned gold and orange, I thought of my husband again. He would have hated this noise. He had been a quiet man, the kind who listened more than he spoke. The next day, the mail arrived. Among the bills was a letter addressed to E. Brooks. I opened it absently and froze. Inside was an offer from a local realtor. "Following your son's inquiry, we're pleased to confirm interest from potential buyers for your property at 1 and 18 Shoreline Drive." My son's inquiry. I sat down slowly. The sounds from the beach faded into a dull roar in my ears. He hadn't even mentioned this. I folded the letter and placed it on the table. My hands didn't shake. I stared at the sunlight spilling across the floorboards. They thought this house was theirs to enjoy, maybe even sell. They thought I was just a lonely old woman too grateful for company to notice what was happening. They were wrong. That evening, I joined them by the fire pit. The smell of roasting marshmallows hung in the air. Ethan handed me a blanket. "You okay, Mom? You've been quiet." "I'm fine," I said, "just thinking." "About what?" Miranda asked, half laughing. I looked out at the waves, their white tips glowing in the moonlight. "About surprises," I said softly. "How people react to them." She smiled, not understanding. "Oh, we love surprises." "I know," I said. "That's why tomorrow I'll give you one." No one heard the calm in my tone as anything more than casual. But inside, I felt the stillness of the sea before a storm. Something wasn't right, and I was going to find out exactly why they'd come. The next morning, the beach house felt heavy with silence, the kind that hums after a storm, even when no one notices it yet. I woke before dawn, out of habit, and stood by the window watching the faint light creep across the ocean. The waves rolled in steady, soft, like breath. Down the hall, I could hear soft snoring, the shuffle of feet, the sound of someone opening the refrigerator. They were comfortable here already. Too comfortable. I made coffee, black and strong, and took my cup out to the porch. The boards were cool under my bare feet. The salty air mixed with the smell of brewed coffee and damp sand. For a moment, I tried to remember why I'd bought this house. I'd told myself it was for peace, for solitude. After my husband passed, I'd spent months in the city, surrounded by noise but feeling invisible. When I first saw this little blue cottage by the ocean, I thought, here, I can finally hear myself think. Now I could barely hear the sea over the sound of my son's playlist blaring from the kitchen. Miranda's voice floated through the open door. "Do we have any oat milk? Regular milk makes me bloated." I closed my eyes and took another sip. "Morning, Mom." Ethan appeared with a smile, wearing his swim trunks and sunglasses even though the sun had barely risen. "You're up early." "Always have been," I said. He stretched, looking out toward the water. "We were thinking of taking the jet skis out again today. Oh, and I called the plumber. Guest bathroom's slow to drain. Hope that's okay." "The plumber?" I repeated. "When did it start leaking?" "It's not leaking. Miranda just doesn't like the smell in there. You know, beach houses get that salt dampness. We'll have him check everything." He said it like we owned the place, like he was managing it for me. I just nodded. "All right." After he left, I sat alone, the taste of coffee turning bitter on my tongue. The ocean kept rolling, unconcerned. I found myself tracing the edge of my mug, thinking of my husband again. He would have known what to say. He always did. He would have smiled that quiet smile of his and said, "You can't stop the tide, Ellen, but you can build your own shore." I wasn't sure what that shore was yet, but I could feel it forming. Later that day, a delivery truck pulled into the driveway. Boxes of groceries, bags of snacks, and enough drinks for a week. Miranda came out with her tablet, signing for everything like it was her own home. "What's all this?" I asked. "Oh, just supplies," she said cheerfully. "We figured we'd stay through next weekend. It's the long holiday, remember? We already invited a few more friends to come by. You don't mind, do you?" I looked at her, the sunlight glinting off her sunglasses. It's a small house, I said. She laughed. Oh, don't worry. We'll make it work. You'll love the company. I smiled, though my jaw ached from holding it. Inside, the refrigerator door swung open and closed. Someone's wet flip-flops slapped against the tile. My quiet little haven now sounded like a boardwalk. That evening, I set the table for dinner out of habit. The plates I'd picked carefully from a local craft shop last year, soft white with blue edges, looked almost out of place under the harsh kitchen light. Ethan didn't notice. He was too busy telling his friend about a real estate podcast. This area's blowing up, he said. People are paying double for waterfronts now. It's insane. Mom got this place for a steal. Miranda chimed in, pouring wine into her glass. Imagine if we renovated, just a few updates and it'd triple in value. Their friend nodded, eyes wide. Man, if that were mine, I'd flip it tomorrow. I pretended not to hear. I focused on my fork, on the soft clink of metal against ceramic. After dinner, everyone moved to the porch for drinks. I stayed behind, wiping the table even though it was already clean. My fingers trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from restraint. The mail from the realtor still sat on the counter. I'd tucked it under a newspaper so no one would see. Every now and then, I caught myself glancing at it, the envelope like a secret waiting to breathe. I stepped outside. Miranda was laughing loudly, her voice cutting through the night air. We could easily make this a rental. I mean, it's not like Ellen swims or surfs anymore. She'd barely use it. Ethan didn't answer, but he didn't disagree. I looked up at the stars, the same stars my husband and I used to watch from our old porch, back when life was simpler, kinder. I remembered the night he told me about his heart condition. He'd smiled then, trying to be brave. Promise me one thing, he'd said. Don't let them walk all over you when I'm gone. I had promised. The next morning, the plumber arrived. I hadn't called him, but Ethan handled everything like it was his responsibility. The man checked the pipes, then came to me with the invoice. Who should I make this out to? He asked. Mrs. Brooks, I said quickly. Ellen Brooks. Ethan came in just then, frowning. Actually, I'll handle the payment. The plumber glanced between us. I reached out and took the paper from his hand. No, I'll take care of it, I said. My tone left no room for argument, relief. Ethan hesitated, then shrugged. Whatever you want, Mom. When the plumber left, I closed the door slowly, feeling the latch click into place. It sounded final. That night, while everyone slept, I went through my desk drawer and took out the folder again. The deed, the insurance, the bills, all neatly filed under my name. I ran my fingers along the edges of each page. The paper felt cool, solid, unshakable. Through the thin walls, I could hear Miranda's muffled laugh. What? She was on the phone, whispering to someone. It's perfect, she said. He'll convince her soon. Then we can list it before summer's over. I stopped breathing for a second. He'll convince her. I set the folder down carefully. The lamp cast a soft pool of light on the desk. My reflection looked back at me in the glass. Older, yes, but not weak. The next morning, I acted as though nothing had happened. I made breakfast, offered coffee, smiled when Miranda asked for almond milk again. But inside, I was making my own quiet list. The things that were mine. The documents I'd need. The steps to take. In the afternoon, I walked to the little post office down the road. The clerk, a kind man with gray hair, greeted me by name. Mrs. Brooks, how's retirement treating you? It's lively, I said. I mailed a single envelope, addressed to a local law firm I'd once used for my husband's estate. Inside was a copy of my deed and a simple handwritten note. Please confirm ownership and notify me of any unauthorized inquiries. When I left the post office, the air smelled like sea salt and rain. The sky had turned a pale gray, the kind that promised a storm later. I pulled my cardigan tighter around me and walked home slowly. As I reached the porch, I saw them, Ethan and Miranda, talking to a man in a suit near the driveway. The realtor from the letter. They didn't see me at first. I stood by the gate, listening. What, of course she'll agree once we explain it's for her benefit, Miranda was saying. It's too much house for her to manage. The man nodded, smiling politely. Once she signs the preliminary documents, we can proceed. I stepped forward. Preliminary documents for what? They all turned. Miranda blinked, her smile stiff. Oh, Ellen, we were just discussing your future, Ethan interrupted quickly. We thought maybe it's time to downsize. You know, something easier to maintain. I see. My voice was calm, even. And you assumed I'd want your help selling my house? Ethan's jaw tightened. Mom, don't make it sound. I'm not making it sound like anything, I said. I'm just asking. The realtor shifted awkwardly. Perhaps I should. Yes, I said. Perhaps you should. He muttered a quick goodbye and walked toward his car. Miranda's smile vanished. Mom, you're overreacting, Ethan said. Maybe, I said, but it's my right to. He started to argue, then stopped when he saw my face. For the first time in days, the porch was quiet. I need some time alone, I said finally. I went inside, closing the door behind me. The lock clicked again, steady, deliberate. Outside, I could hear them murmuring, their voices low and uneasy. The storm clouds rolled closer, heavy and dark over the water. I stood by the window, watching the waves rise. The air was thick with salt and tension. They thought they could take my peace, my home, and call it love. They thought I wouldn't notice. But I had already started my own plan, and like the sea, I could be calm, until I wasn't. That night, thunder rolled far out over the ocean, the kind that sounds more like a warning than weather. The house trembled a little with each low rumble. I sat in the dark living room, the soft glow from the lamp casting long shadows across the walls. Everyone else had gone to bed. I could hear doors closing, laughter dying down, the hum of the dishwasher finishing its cycle. The storm outside was quieter than the one building inside me. I opened the letter from the realtor again, reading it slowly. Following your son's inquiry. The words glowed faintly under the light. My name wasn't mentioned anywhere. Only his. My fingers traced the edges of the paper. I had spent a lifetime building this family, this life, this little place by the sea. And now, my own son had turned it into a transaction. Lightning flashed, quick and bright, illuminating the picture frame on the shelf. My husband holding Ethan as a baby. His smile looked softer than I remembered. Maybe it was just the light. By morning, the storm had passed, but the sky stayed gray. The air smelled like wet wood and salt. I made coffee and took it to the porch. The world was still dripping, fresh, quiet. For a few minutes, it almost felt peaceful again. Then I heard Miranda's voice behind me. Ellen, I was thinking, maybe you'd like to visit Ruth for a while? She said she'd love to have you. I turned. She stood there in her robe, hair wrapped in a towel, smiling too sweetly. Visit Ruth? I asked. Yes, she said. You've been working so hard, and you deserve a little break. We can handle things here. The coffee turned cold in my hands. Handle things? Just the house, she said quickly. We'll make sure everything runs smoothly. You don't need to worry about a thing. I looked at her, the way her smile didn't reach her eyes. That's thoughtful, I said quietly. But I'm not leaving. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, annoyance, maybe both. Oh, well, if you change your mind. She walked away, humming, the sound light and hollow. Ethan came out later, his tone careful. Mom, Miranda didn't mean anything by that. She just thinks you could use some rest. I rest fine here, I said. He nodded, hands in his pockets, glancing at the water. You know, when Dad died, you kind of shut down. Maybe you don't realize how isolated you've become. I smiled faintly. I'm not isolated, Ethan. I'm alone by choice. He didn't answer. He just sighed and walked down to the beach. I watched him go, the wind tugging at his shirt, the tide curling around his feet. Later, Miranda called from the deck. We're having people over again tonight. Just a small gathering. A small gathering turned into 12 people. Loud music, grills smoking, laughter spilling into every corner of the house. Someone spilled wine on the couch. Someone else dropped a plate in the kitchen. I moved through it all quietly, like a ghost in my own home. At one point, I heard Miranda laughing near the fire pit. Ellen's such a sweetheart, she said to someone. She doesn't mind any of this. She loves company. I stood in the doorway, the words sticking in the air like ash. When the last car finally drove off, the beach was littered with plastic cups and cigarette butts. Ethan was asleep on the couch. Miranda was scrolling through her phone, her face glowing blue in the light. I stepped outside, barefoot. The sand was cool, the ocean dark. I walked down to the water's edge and let the tide reach my ankles. It was the same ocean I'd stood beside the day my husband's ashes were scattered. I remembered how quiet that day was, how final. I whispered his name into the wind, not expecting an answer. They think I'm weak, I said softly. They think I won't fight. The waves came in again, stronger this time, touching the hem of my nightgown. When I turned back, the house looked smaller than I remembered. A crowd had filled it, but it had never felt emptier. The next morning, Miranda announced she'd invited a photographer. For the rental listing, she said lightly, as if it were nothing. A photographer? I asked. Just for fun, she lied. To capture memories. The man arrived around noon, cheerful and chatty, snapping photos of every room. This place is a gem, he said. Ocean view like that? You could get top dollar. Miranda nodded eagerly. That's what I've been telling her. He turned to me. You're lucky to have such helpful kids. I smiled thinly. Yes, I said. Lucky. After he left, I went upstairs to my bedroom and closed the door. My reflection stared back from the mirror. My hair, silver now, framed a face I barely recognized. But the eyes, they were steady. On the nightstand sat the small jewelry box my husband had given me on our anniversary. Inside was the old key to our first home, the one we sold to afford this one. I held it in my palm for a long moment, feeling its weight. That evening, I made dinner for everyone. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh bread. The table looked perfect. The smell filled the house. They came in, surprised. Mom, you didn't have to cook, Ethan said. I wanted to, I said. During dinner, I kept my voice calm. I asked about their plans, their work, their children. When Miranda mentioned potential buyers, I nodded as if she were talking about the weather. Afterward, as they cleared the table, I said, Ethan, could you come here for a moment? He followed me into the living room. The envelope from the realtor was on the coffee table. I handed it to him. What's this? He asked. You tell me, I said. He looked inside, his expression tightening. Mom, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I said. You tried to sell my home. He rubbed his forehead. You're taking this the wrong way. We were just planning my future, I asked. Silence filled the room. Dad trusted you, I said finally. He believed you'd take care of me when he couldn't. Was this what he meant? Ethan's eyes dropped. It's not like that, Mom. It's exactly like that. My voice didn't rise, but something in it made him look up. You forgot whose name is on that deed. You forgot who built this life for you. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I thought we were helping, he whispered. Help me by leaving my house alone, I said. Help me by remembering I'm still here. I turned and walked toward the porch. The air outside was thick and warm. I could hear Miranda inside, asking what was wrong. Ethan didn't answer. That night, I sat by the window again, watching lightning flicker far out at sea. The ocean was restless, churning. I felt the same way. In the morning, the air had shifted. The tide was higher, the wind sharper. Miranda avoided my eyes. Ethan tried to act normal, but the silence between us said enough. I called my lawyer after breakfast. His voice was calm, reassuring. Don't worry, Mrs. Brooks, he said. Your ownership is secure, but it might be wise to set some boundaries. I already have, I said. When I hung up, I went to my desk and began to write. Not a letter, not a threat, just a list. Repairs needed. Guests staying. Rules for the house. Simple, practical things. I left it on the kitchen counter. By afternoon, the sky darkened again. Another storm was coming. I could feel it in my bones. Miranda came to me, her tone clipped. Ellen, I heard you called a lawyer. That's unnecessary, don't you think? No, I said. I think it's overdue. Her lips thinned. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I'm not the one making it hard, I said. You are. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she smiled that brittle smile of hers. Fine. Do what you want. I will, I said. She turned and walked away. I heard the sound of her sandals on the stairs, the slam of a door. Outside, thunder cracked again. I stood at the window, watching the rain blur the horizon. The ocean was wild now, waves crashing against the shore, foam spraying high into the air. I thought about everything that had led to this moment, the years of giving, forgiving, excusing, and how quiet it had all been. Quiet doesn't mean weak. As night fell, I made tea and sat on the porch, listening to the rain beat against the roof. For the first time since they'd arrived, I felt something close to peace, because I knew what came next. They thought the storm was outside. They had no idea it had already started. Right here, inside the house they thought they owned. The morning after the storm, the house smelled of salt and damp wood. The air was cooler, the kind that carried the scent of wet sand and pine from the dunes. I woke early again, though I hadn't really slept. The sound of the waves was rougher than usual, but steady, almost like breathing. Downstairs, I could hear drawers opening, the muffled sound of Miranda's voice. I stayed in bed a moment longer, watching the ceiling fan turn, listening to the rhythm of the house. It didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt borrowed, occupied, invaded. When I finally walked into the kitchen, Miranda was packing boxes, wine glasses, plates, even the small ceramic bowls I'd bought at the local market years ago. "What are you doing?" I asked. She didn't turn around. "Oh, just organizing," she said. "You've got too much clutter here, Ellen. We're making space for when the contractor visits." "Contractor?" She looked up, smiling faintly. "We're thinking of renovating. Nothing big, just modern touches. Open concept, brighter colors." I felt the mug in my hand tremble slightly. "And who exactly is we?" "Ethan and I," she said simply. "You'll love it. It'll make the house easier to sell. To manage." She caught herself too late. "I see," I said quietly. "Then I'll be sure to stay out of your way." She blinked, maybe hearing the edge in my voice for the first time. "Ellen, you're not upset, are you? We're only trying to help." "I'm not upset," I said. "I'm just watching." Later that day, Ethan returned from town carrying grocery bags and a new set of keys. "For the patio doors," he said. "The old lock sticks." "Those keys look different," I said. "Yeah, the guy said he had to change the cylinder. Don't worry, we'll get you a spare." Again, I nodded slowly. "Thank you." When he left the room, I walked over to the new lock. It glinted, bright and unfamiliar, in the morning light. My key wouldn't fit anymore. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table. Rain had started again, tapping softly against the windows. The letter from the realtor was gone. So was the folder with the deed. I searched the drawers quietly, methodically, empty. I found them later, in Ethan's backpack by the couch. The envelope torn open, my name folded inside. I didn't wake him. I didn't say a word. I just took it all back, slid it under my pillow, and lay awake until dawn. The next morning, I made breakfast for everyone. Pancakes, bacon, coffee. The same breakfast I'd made for Ethan when he was little. He smiled, maybe thinking the tension had passed. Miranda chattered about the new contractor. I waited until they were finished eating before I spoke. "You'll be meeting him without me," I said. Miranda froze mid-bite. "What do you mean?" "I canceled the appointment," I said simply. "And I called my lawyer again this morning." Ethan's fork clattered against his plate. "Mom, why would you do that?" "Because this is my home," I said. "Not yours. Not hers. Mine." Miranda let out a small laugh, sharp and nervous. "Ellen, let's be reasonable. We're family. You can't just—" "I can," I said, "and I have." She stared at me, her lips tightening. "You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing." The air in the room went still. Ethan glanced between us, the way he used to when he was a boy caught between two arguments he couldn't fix. "Mom," he said softly, "we just wanted to help." "Help yourself, maybe," I said. He didn't respond. He just looked down, shame creeping across his face. After breakfast, Miranda left for a walk, muttering something about needing air. Ethan followed her a few minutes later. I stood at the window, watching them on the beach, their figures small against the gray sky. For a moment, I remembered another beach, a different time. Ethan, age 10, holding his father's hand as they built a sandcastle together. The wind had been warm then, the laughter real. I could still hear it if I tried hard enough. But those echoes were gone now. I spent the afternoon cleaning, wiping down the counters, folding towels, setting the furniture back where it belonged. Every motion calmed me. Order had always been my way of surviving chaos. When evening came, the sky turned pink and gold over the ocean. They hadn't returned yet. I lit a candle, just one, and sat at the table with a notebook. I began to write notes, dates, memories, details. A record of everything that had happened since the day they arrived. My own account. It wasn't anger that guided my pen. It was clarity. By the time I finished, I realized the house was completely silent again. For the first time in days, I could hear the waves clearly. When the door finally opened, Miranda stepped in first. Her tone was softer now. "Ellen," she said, "we talked about it. Maybe we rushed things. We'll stay just a few more days and then we'll go. You can have your peace back." I looked at her. "Peace isn't something you give back, Miranda. It's something you stop taking." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't have to be cruel." "I'm not," I said. "Cruelty is doing what you did and calling it help." She looked like she might say more, but Ethan touched her arm. "Let it go," he whispered. She pulled away and went upstairs. Ethan lingered in the doorway. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm sorry." "I know you are," I said, "but you let it happen." He nodded, his face pale. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Most things don't start with meaning to," I said. "They start with permission." He swallowed hard. "Do you want us to leave tomorrow?" "Yes," I said. "Tomorrow." He nodded and walked away. That night, I sat on the porch again, watching the dark water shimmer under the moon. My husband's voice came back to me. "Don't let them walk all over you." I smiled faintly. "I didn't," I whispered. In the morning, they packed quietly. The house filled with the sound of zippers, doors closing, drawers sliding shut. Miranda didn't say goodbye. Ethan hugged me once, briefly, the way you hug someone you're afraid to lose but already have. When their car pulled out of the driveway, the silence that followed was deep, almost holy. I walked through the room slowly. Everything smelled like lemon cleaner and sea air. My house again. My peace again. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window. Outside, the gulls circled low over the surf, calling to one another. The light hit the water just running it silver. I thought about everything that had happened, the deceit, the noise, the quiet victory of still standing. People think strength looks like shouting. It doesn't. It looks like a woman standing alone in her kitchen, steady, unshaken, with her house still hers and her soul still intact. The waves rolled in and out, endless, certain. I breathed in deeply and whispered, almost to myself, "Let them bring their storms. I've learned how to stay standing in the rain." Outside, the tide pulled back, leaving the shore clean. The kind of clean that only comes after a storm has finally passed. The first morning after they left, the house felt almost too quiet. The air had weight again, but it was a softer kind. Peaceful, not heavy. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint hiss of the ocean outside. I sat on the porch with my coffee, wrapped in my old blue cardigan. The one my husband used to tease me about, said it made me look like a sea captain. I smiled to myself, then looked out over the waves. They were calm, the way they always are after a storm. For the first time in weeks, I could hear my own breathing. A seagull landed on the railing near me, cocking its head like it wanted conversation. "It's just us again," I said softly. It stayed for a moment, then flew off, wings flashing white against the sun. When I went back inside, the quiet followed me. The house was tidy now, back to the way it had been before the invasion. Their towels were gone, the clutter cleared. But their absence left small traces. A faint stain on the carpet, a forgotten sandal under the couch, the smell of perfume that lingered no matter how much I cleaned. I picked up the sandal and set it by the door. Then I looked at the empty space beside the couch, the place where my husband used to sit. I whispered, "You'd be proud of me, Noel. I didn't let them take it." The kettle whistled in the kitchen. I poured tea and sat by the window with my notebook. The list I'd started that night was still there. I flipped the page and began a new one. Next steps. At the top, I wrote, "Protect what's mine." It wasn't revenge. It was order. By noon, I'd called my lawyer again. He promised to file a protective notice on the property title, something that would prevent any unauthorized transactions. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called the local real estate office, the same one from the letter. A woman answered cheerfully, "Coastal Realty, how can I help you?" "This is Mrs. Brooks," I said. "I'd like to know who authorized the inquiry on my property." There was a pause. "One moment, please." A few clicks on a keyboard. Then her voice came back, hesitant. "It was your son, ma'am, but the request has been withdrawn." "Good," I said. "Please make a note that I'll handle all matters personally from now on." When I hung up, the room felt lighter. I spent the afternoon baking, not because anyone was coming, but because the smell of bread made the house feel alive again. The simple act of kneading the dough, pressing and folding, felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen quietly. By sunset, the bread was cooling on the counter. I sliced one piece, buttered it, and carried it out to the porch. The sky was pink and violet, the water calm. Then I heard footsteps on the gravel. Ethan. He stood at the gate, holding a small box. His expression was uncertain, boyish, the way it used to be when he'd done something wrong and didn't know how to apologize. "Mom," he said softly. "Can I come in?" I nodded once. "You're already here." He climbed the steps and stopped a few feet away. I wanted to return this. He held out the spare house key. I looked at it in his hand, the same key he'd insisted on having, just in case. Thank you, I said. He didn't move. Miranda's at her mother's, he said after a moment. We're taking some time apart. I said nothing. The ocean answered for me, steady and endless. I know what we did was wrong, he continued. I thought I was helping. I thought you needed... I needed honesty, I said, not help. He looked down, nodding. You were always stronger than I gave you credit for. I didn't need strength, Ethan. I needed respect. He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. I don't expect you to forgive us. I already have, I said, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. He nodded again. Well, I understand. We stood there for a while, the sound of the waves filling the silence. Then he said, You know, Dad always said you were the backbone of this family. I guess I didn't believe him until now. He was right, I said. He usually was. Ethan smiled faintly. He'd be proud of you. I hope so, I said. He set the box on the porch railing. There's something else in there, he said. Some old photos from when we packed up your things last year. I thought you might want them. I waited until he walked away before opening the box. Inside were faded photographs. Ethan as a boy, Noel at the grill, me in a sundress standing in front of our first home. I ran my finger along the edges, feeling time press against my skin. One photo caught my eye. It was taken years ago at a beach, Noel holding Ethan on his shoulders, both of them laughing. I turned it over. On the back, Noel's handwriting. Don't forget to live, even when it hurts. I held it for a long time. Then I tucked it into my notebook. That night, I built a fire in the small pit outside. The wind was cool, the sky filled with stars. I poured a glass of wine and sat near the flames, listening to them crackle. For the first time since Ethan and Miranda had arrived, I felt safe. Not because they were gone, but because I'd finally remembered who I was without them. Later, as the fire burned low, headlights appeared down the road. A familiar car stopped at the end of the drive. For a moment, I thought Ethan had come back again, but it was Ruth, my sister. She stepped out, waving. You didn't answer your phone, she said, walking up the path. So I figured I'd check on you myself. I smiled. I've been fine. She hugged me, holding on longer than usual. He told me what happened, she said quietly. I'm sorry, Ellen. You don't deserve any of that. I know, I said, but maybe I needed it to remember my worth. She sat beside me, warming her hands near the fire. You always find a way to turn pain into something solid. It's the only thing that keeps it from breaking you, I said. We sat together for a while, not talking much. Just two old women listening to the waves, the firelight dancing on our faces. After she left, I stayed outside until the embers faded. The house behind me glowed softly in the dark, its windows reflecting the last flickers of orange. When I went inside, I stopped by the doorway and looked around. Everything was still. The air smelled faintly of smoke and bread. My husband's photo hung on the wall, smiling the same patient smile he always had. I whispered, We're okay now. The next morning, I started painting again. The small easel by the window had gathered dust, but the brushes were still good. I painted the horizon, the line where sea met sky, exactly as it looked that morning. Quiet, strong, unbending. Each brushstroke felt like a breath. As the colors dried, sunlight poured through the window, bright and warm. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like something had been taken from me. I felt like something had been returned. The house was mine. The silence was mine. And finally, the peace was mine too. Out on the porch, the wind carried the faintest scent of salt and pine again. I closed my eyes, breathed it in, and whispered the words I'd written in my notebook. Peace isn't given. It's reclaimed. Then I smiled because I had. A week passed after Ethan's visit. The days folded into one another, slow and quiet. The mornings were cool, the evenings golden. I fell back into my old rhythm. Coffee at sunrise, a walk on the sand, watering the small garden by the porch. The sea breeze carried peace, but it also carried memory. Sometimes I'd catch myself expecting voices, the echo of laughter, the scrape of chairs on the deck. But there was only the steady hum of waves and the sound of gulls circling above. I'd grown used to company, even the wrong kind. Now the silence asked me to relearn solitude. That morning I opened the mailbox and found a small envelope with Ethan's handwriting. No return address. I stood in the sunlight, turning it over. Then I went inside, set it on the table, and made tea before opening it. Inside was a single note. Mom, Miranda filed for divorce. I'm staying with a friend in Portland for a while. I just wanted to say thank you for standing your ground. I see it now. The difference between helping someone and taking from them. I hope someday I can make it right. Love, Ethan. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it beside the old photograph of him as a boy. A mix of sorrow and relief filled me. Outside, the ocean sparkled, endless and unchanged. I stepped onto the porch, tea in hand, watching the sunlight dance across the water. The gulls swooped low, their cries sharp against the wind. Later that afternoon, Ruth came by again, her car crunching over the gravel. She carried a basket of peaches and a pie dish covered in foil. I baked too much, she said, smiling. Thought you could use some sweetness around here. I could, I said. We sat on the porch, eating warm pie straight from the dish. The crust flaked, the peaches soft and syrupy. Ruth leaned back in her chair, squinting toward the water. It's good to see you peaceful again, she said. It's strange, I said. The same walls, the same sea, but everything feels different now. That's what happens when you reclaim something, she said. It changes shape in your hands. I nodded. The wind lifted strands of my hair. I think I was afraid of being alone, I said. But now I realize I was already alone, just crowded by people who didn't see me. Ruth smiled gently. That's a kind of loneliness you don't deserve. I suppose none of us do, I said. After she left, I walked down to the beach barefoot. The sand was cool, damp from the tide. I walked until the water touched my ankles, then my calves. The ocean was warm that day, the sky stretched open and blue. I thought about forgiveness, not as something you give, but something you stop carrying. Miranda's voice echoed faintly in my mind, all her bright plans, her easy confidence. I didn't hate her anymore. I pitied her. People like that don't understand peace. They only understand possession. I spent the next few days clearing out the house, room by room, not out of anger, but necessity. I boxed up old linens, extra dishes, things I hadn't touched in years. I gave most of it to the church donation center in town. When the young volunteer came to collect it, she looked around the living room and said, "You have a lovely home, ma'am." I smiled. "Yes," I said. "I do." After she left, I dusted the shelves, rearranged the books, and placed fresh flowers on the dining table. Lilies, my husband's favorite. The scent filled the air. That evening, the sky turned the color of honey. I poured myself a small glass of wine and stood on the porch. The tide was low, the horizon soft and pink. Somewhere far down the beach, I saw a family setting up a picnic. Their laughter carried faintly through the wind. For a moment, I watched them, the way the mother spread the blanket, the way the children chased each other along the shoreline. It hurt, but gently, like an old bruise. I didn't envy them. I just recognized them. When night fell, I lit the small lantern on the porch and sat in its glow. The notebook lay open on my lap. I added another line to it. Peace is what's left when love grows up. The next morning, I received another letter. This one from the lawyer. It confirmed that the property protections were in place, that no further claims could be made. It was official now. Secure. I folded the letter and placed it in the same folder that had once been nearly taken from me. The weight of fear of vigilance began to fade. I started spending afternoons painting again. My first piece after everything wasn't the sea, it was the house. The soft blue siding, the porch railing, the window that caught the sunrise just right. When I stepped back to look, I realized I'd painted not what it looked like, but what it felt like. Safe, solid, mine. Sometimes, when the tide came high, I'd walk along the waterline collecting shells. I began filling a jar with them, small reminders that even the ocean gives back what it takes. One evening, the phone rang. I hesitated before answering. It was Ethan. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, Ethan." He sounded tired, older somehow. "I found an apartment," he said. "By the river. It's small, but it's mine." "That's good," I said. "I've been thinking about everything," he continued. "About how easily I let things slip away. Dad's trust, your peace. I can't undo it, but I can learn from it." "You already are," I said softly. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Would it be okay if I visited in a few weeks? Just me." "Yes," I said, "but not to stay, to visit." He laughed a little. "I understand." When we hung up, I sat for a long time, listening to the faint sound of the ocean outside. The house no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like home again. That night, I dreamed of my husband. He stood on the beach, smiling, the wind tugging at his hair. "You did it," he said. "You finally built your shore." When I woke, the sun was just beginning to rise. I opened the window, letting the morning air wash through the room. The curtains swayed like breath. I made coffee and carried it to the porch. The horizon burned gold. From the hill behind the house, I could see the mailbox at the end of the drive, the same one I'd checked every day since the storm. I realized suddenly that I no longer expected bad news to come from it. Only letters, perhaps, or maybe nothing at all. Both would be fine. The world was quiet again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of small sounds: waves, wind, the creak of the wooden porch under my chair. I thought of everything that had happened: the noise, the betrayal, the loss, the slow rebuilding. It struck me that the ocean never stops returning to the shore, no matter how many times it's pushed back. Maybe that's what survival is. Not staying untouched, but always coming back. I watched the waves roll in and whispered, "I'm still here." And this time, it didn't sound like defiance. It sounded like peace. The following week, the sky turned softer, paler, the air cooler in the evenings. The house had settled into its own rhythm again. Quiet footsteps, the steady hum of the ceiling fan, the faint echo of the ocean through open windows. I'd started sleeping better. I no longer woke up expecting noise or footsteps in the hall. The house belonged to silence again. One afternoon, as I was watering the small patch of flowers near the porch, a familiar car pulled up at the gate. Ethan stepped out, carrying a small bag and a hesitant smile. He looked thinner, older, calmer. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Hi," I replied. "You're early." "I took the scenic route," he said. "Couldn't stay away from the ocean." I handed him a glass of lemonade when he came up the steps. He took it with both hands like it was something fragile. We sat together on the porch, the air thick with salt and sunlight. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The ocean filled the silence between us. "I like what you've done with the place," he said finally. "It feels peaceful." "It is," I said. "Finally." He nodded, tracing the rim of his glass. "I've been thinking a lot, Mom, about what I lost, about how easily I let things slip away." I waited. "I thought helping meant taking charge," he said. "I didn't realize it meant listening first." "You're not the first person to mistake control for care," I said quietly. He looked out at the sea. "Miranda used to say I'd never stop needing to prove myself. She was right about that. But she didn't understand what I was trying to prove." "What was it?" "That I wasn't helpless, that I could build something on my own." I studied him for a moment. His shoulders slumped forward slightly, the sun catching in his hair. "You don't need to prove that to me," I said. "You never did." He smiled faintly. "I think I needed to prove it to myself." We sat quietly again. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of gulls. "I brought something," he said after a while. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a framed photo, Noelle holding a much younger me in front of our first home. The paint on the porch behind us was peeling, and we both looked sunburned but happy. "I found it in Dad's old office stuff," Ethan said. "I thought it should be here." I took the frame in my hands. The glass was warm from the sun. For a moment, I saw that day clearly. The smell of paint, the sound of the wind through the trees, Noel laughing as he balanced the camera on the hood of the car. "Thank you," I said softly. He looked at me, eyes full of something I hadn't seen in years: respect. We spent the rest of the afternoon walking along the beach. The tide was low, and the sand cool beneath our feet. Every so often, Ethan would pick up a shell and hand it to me without saying anything. I put them in my pocket, the small clink sounding like forgiveness. When we reached the rocks at the end of the cove, he stopped. "You ever think about leaving here?" he asked. "No," I said. "I came here to stay." He nodded. "I get it now. Some places aren't escapes. They're anchors." I smiled faintly. Exactly. We turned back before the sun began to set. As we walked, I realized something had shifted between us. Not back to what it was, but forward into something truer. That evening, I made dinner. Simple: grilled fish, salad, fresh bread. Ethan set the table without me asking, humming softly to himself. The sound brought a strange comfort. When we sat down, he said grace quietly. It had been years since I'd heard him do that. After dinner, we lingered over coffee. The windows were open, and the night air drifted in, carrying the smell of salt and jasmine. "Do you ever miss him?" he asked suddenly. "Every day," I said, "but not the same way I used to. It's not an ache anymore. It's a presence." He nodded. "Sometimes I dream about him. He never says anything, just looks at me. It's like he's waiting for me to understand something." "Maybe you already have," I said. He smiled a little. "Maybe." When he went to bed that night, I stayed up a while longer. I walked through the house, turning off lights, feeling the calm settle in the corners. In the living room, the photograph he'd brought sat on the mantel, catching the soft glow from the lamp. I touched the frame gently and whispered, "He's learning, Noel." The next morning, I woke early and found Ethan on the porch with a cup of coffee. He was watching the sunrise, the same way I used to. "It's beautiful," he said. "It always is," I said. We talked quietly about small things, the neighbors, the repairs, the weather. No tension, no unspoken words, just a rhythm, easy and human. Before he left that afternoon, he hugged me. Not out of guilt this time, but out of gratitude. "I'll come back soon," he said. "Just make sure it's because you want to," I replied. He smiled. "I will." After he drove away, I stood by the gate for a long time, watching the road until it disappeared behind the dunes. The wind carried the faint sound of his engine, then nothing at all. Inside, the house felt warm again. The kind of warmth that comes not from company, but from peace. I made myself tea and sat at the table, opening my notebook once more. I added a new line. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't saying no, it's meaning it. Later that day, I walked along the beach again. The tide was higher, waves curling close to my feet. I let them touch me, then pull back. Each one left a faint mark on the sand, gone in seconds. I thought about everything. The betrayal, the confrontation, the quiet rebuilding. About how even love can lose its shape when it's mixed with pride. But as the wind brushed my face, I also thought about beginnings. How even broken trust can sprout something new if left in good soil. I found a small, smooth shell shaped like a heart and tucked it into my pocket. Then I looked out over the horizon and said quietly, "You were right, Noel. The sea does heal." The sun sank low, turning the waves copper and gold. The water stretched endlessly, steady and alive. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anyone. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't angry. I was simply home. The morning after Ethan left, the air felt different, lighter, as if the house itself had taken a deep breath. The waves were calm, small ripples brushing the sand like whispers. I sat on the porch with my coffee, watching sunlight flicker across the water. The world was still. I'd grown used to peace now, not the kind that hides from conflict, but the kind that comes after surviving it. The kind you earn. When I went inside, I noticed the wooden box Ethan had brought still sitting on the shelf. Beside it was an envelope he'd forgotten. I opened it and found a letter from my husband, one I'd never seen before. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting slightly faded. It began simply, "If you're reading this, I'm gone. But I want you to remember something. Don't let love turn into permission. Give, but don't surrender. And when the time comes, choose peace, even if you have to fight for it." I sat down slowly, reading it again and again. His voice filled the room, calm and steady as the sea. I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. "I did what you told me," I whispered. And it worked. Later that day, I decided to go into town. The drive along the coastal road was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums instead of echoes. The local grocery store still smelled of salt and fresh produce. Mrs. Taylor at the counter smiled when she saw me. "Haven't seen you in weeks, Ellen," she said. "Still hiding by the shore?" "Just resting," I said. "Well, you look lighter," she said. "Whatever storm you had, it must have passed." "It did," I said softly. When I got back home, I unpacked the groceries and baked a small batch of cookies. I didn't really need them, but I liked the smell. They made the air feel kind. While they baked, I walked into the study and opened my old photo albums. Page after page, I saw the story of my life unfold. Birthdays, graduations, beach days, the small moments that had built everything. One photo caught my eye. Ethan, maybe 6 years old, standing on a chair beside Noel, helping him hang curtains. His face was covered in dust, smiling wide. I smiled back at it, tracing the edge of the picture. That night, the sky turned red as the sun sank. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of seaweed and salt. I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, the sound of waves steady against the shore. For a moment, I thought I saw someone walking along the waterline. A tall figure, hands in pockets, moving slowly toward the rocks. It wasn't Ethan. I knew that much. But for a second, I pretended it was Noel. "You always find your way back here," I whispered into the wind. The next morning, Ruth called. "You sound better every time I talk to you," she said. "I feel better," I said. "You've done something most people can't," she said. "You stood up without turning hard." I laughed softly. "It took me 68 years to learn how." "Well," she said, "it suits you." After we hung up, I poured another cup of coffee and looked around the house. The light came in warm and gold through the windows. It felt like everything was in its place again. Not just the furniture, but me too. In the afternoon, I drove to the small church in town. It wasn't Sunday, but the doors were always open. Inside, it smelled of wood polish and candle wax. I sat in the back pew, hands folded in my lap. I didn't pray for anything. I just said thank you. When I left, I stopped by the donation board near the door. It listed families in need of temporary housing after a storm destroyed several homes on the other side of town. I tore a small piece of paper from my notebook and wrote my number on it. Next to it, I wrote, "Small guest house available. Quiet, near the ocean." I didn't owe anyone my piece, but I had enough to share. That evening, as the sun went down, I walked along the beach again. The sky was streaked in purple and gold, and the water caught every bit of it. I could see the tide coming in slow, deliberate, like a promise kept. The waves reached my feet, cold and clean. I thought about Ethan, somewhere far away, building his new life. I thought about Miranda, too, maybe learning her own hard lessons. I didn't hate her anymore. She'd been the storm that taught me how to anchor myself. When I got back to the house, the phone was ringing. A woman's voice greeted me. It was from the church. "Mrs. Brooks, we got your note. There's a woman and her granddaughter looking for a short-term place to stay. They lost their home in the flood. Would you be open to meeting them?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Send them by tomorrow." After I hung up, I looked around the house again. It was ready. Clean sheets, fresh flowers, the faint smell of cinnamon from the cookies I'd baked earlier. I hadn't realized until that moment how much I'd missed sharing my space, not with noise, but with life. The next day, the knock came just before noon. A woman in her 50s stood on the porch, her granddaughter clutching her hand. The child had a small pink backpack and eyes wide with both fear and curiosity. "Mrs. Brooks?" the woman asked. "I'm Anna. This is Lily." The church said. "Yes," I said, opening the door wider. "Come in." They stepped inside hesitantly. I showed them the guest room, the same one Ethan and Miranda had taken over months before. It looked different now, softer, welcoming. Lily ran to the window. "You can see the ocean," she said, pressing her small hands against the glass. Anna's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she said. "We'll only stay until we find a place." "Stay as long as you need," I said. "Peace should be shared, not rushed." That evening, we ate dinner together. Simple stew, warm bread, and laughter that didn't sting. Lily told me about her school, her friends, her favorite color. She reminded me of Ethan at that age, full of light before the world taught him about pride. After dinner, I tucked Lily's blanket on the couch where she'd fallen asleep. Anna helped me wash the dishes, her hands trembling slightly. "You've given us more than a place," she said quietly. "You've given us rest." I smiled. I know what that feels like to need. When the house grew quiet again, I stepped outside. The moon was bright, the water silver and endless. Somewhere inside, the faint sound of Lily's laughter still lingered. I whispered to the sea, "It's full again, Noel. The house, the heart, all of it." The waves came in soft and even, like they were answering. I sat there for a long while, letting the cool air settle around me. The ocean stretched wide, the stars above scattered like memories. In the stillness, I realized something I hadn't before. Peace isn't the absence of others. It's knowing when to open the door again. And for the first time since everything began, I was ready. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of laughter drifting down the hallway. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Then I remembered. Anna and Lily. The house wasn't empty anymore. The scent of pancakes filled the air. When I walked into the kitchen, Anna was at the stove, flipping them with careful hands while Lily sat at the table, coloring. "Good morning," I said. Anna turned, smiling. I hope you don't mind. Lily wanted to make you breakfast as a thank you. I looked at the pan. It smells wonderful, I said. Lily beamed. I made the hearts, she said, pointing to the misshapen pancakes on the plate. I sat down beside her, the sound of the waves coming faintly through the open window. The moment felt simple, like the kind of morning I hadn't had in years. Just peace and small kindnesses. After breakfast, Anna helped clean up while Lily ran outside to play. I watched her from the porch, her small footprints marking the sand. She's been through a lot, Anna said quietly. Losing the house, her grandfather passing, it's been hard. I know how that feels, I said. Anna nodded. You've built something strong here, Mrs. Brooks. You can feel it. This house has warmth. It didn't always, I said. It took a while to remember how. She smiled. Thank you for sharing it with us. The days began to take on a gentle rhythm. Mornings with coffee and conversation, afternoons spent reading on the porch while Lily built sandcastles by the shore. The air seemed lighter, the rooms brighter. Sometimes in the evenings, Anna would hum while she cooked, a soft tune that reminded me of my mother. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed the sound of another person existing quietly in the same space. One afternoon, as I was pruning the small rose bushes near the porch, a car slowed at the gate. For a moment, my heart stilled. But it wasn't Ethan, it was Miranda. She stepped out slowly, her hair pulled back, eyes tired. There was no jewelry this time, no sunglasses, no pretense, just a woman standing in the sunlight with her hands clasped. Mrs. Brooks, she said, her voice low. I didn't move. What are you doing here? I wanted to apologize, she said. I didn't know how else to do it. I hurt you and Ethan and myself. I studied her face. She looked smaller somehow, less sharp, more human. I don't hate you, Tal, I said finally. She blinked. You don't? No, I said. Hate keeps you tied to the storm. I've already walked out of it. Her lips trembled. You have every reason to despise me. I took advantage of your kindness. You did, I said, but it taught me to guard it better. She looked toward the ocean. He's doing better, you know. Ethan, he found a job in Portland, started volunteering at a community center. I nodded slowly. Good. He still talks about you, she said. He wants to visit again soon. He's always welcome, I said. As long as he remembers it's a visit. A small laugh escaped her, soft and sad. He will. We stood there for a moment, the waves whispering between us. Finally, she said, I should go. Take care of yourself, I said. She hesitated. You're not angry? Anger doesn't feed you, I said. Peace does. She smiled faintly. You really are stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I always was, I said. You just didn't see it. When she left, I stayed on the porch, watching her car disappear down the road. The wind carried the faint smell of salt and wildflowers. Inside, Lily was sitting on the floor, building a puzzle. Who was that? She asked. Someone from a story that's already ended, I said. Anna looked up from her book, her expression understanding. Closure? Something like that. That evening, we ate dinner outside. The air was cool, the horizon streaked with orange. Lily ran up and down the beach, her laughter carrying on the wind. I sat watching her, the plate of food untouched for a while. Anna followed my gaze. She reminds you of him, doesn't she? Yes, I said. The way he used to run when he was her age, before life got complicated. She nodded. Children don't think about losing things. They just live. Maybe that's the lesson, I said. Later, after they'd gone to bed, I sat by the window with my notebook again. The pages were filled now. Entries about the house, the sea, the lessons I'd learned. I turned to the last blank page and wrote, Peace isn't permanent. It's something you keep choosing. The next day, I received a small envelope in the mail. No return address again, but I recognized Ethan's handwriting immediately. Inside was a single photograph. Him standing by the river, smiling. Beneath it, a note. Starting over isn't so hard when you know where you came from. I placed it beside the picture of Noelle and me on the mantel. 3 lives. 3 stories. All connected by love and hard lessons. That afternoon, Anna knocked softly on my door. There's someone on the phone for you, she said. From the church. I took the call. It was Pastor Lee. Mrs. Brooks, I wanted to thank you, he said. The family you're hosting, Anna and Lily, they're finally on their feet again. We found them a small house nearby. That's wonderful, I said, glancing toward the porch where Lily's pink sandals sat by the door. They wanted me to tell you they're grateful. More than words can say, he said. Tell them they gave me just as much, I replied. After I hung up, I went outside. Anna was sitting on the steps, Lily asleep on her lap. She looked up at me, eyes shining. We found a place, she said. It's not far. We can move next week. I smiled. That's good news. She hesitated. We'll miss you. I'll miss you too, I said. But this is how it's supposed to be. Houses aren't meant to keep people forever. They're meant to prepare them to leave stronger. Her eyes filled. You sound like my mother. Maybe I just sound like someone who's lived, I said. When they drove away the following week, the house grew quiet again, but it wasn't the lonely kind of quiet. It was full, like the hush after a song. I walked through each room, touching the furniture, the walls, the life that remained. Everything felt exactly as it should. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat on the porch one last time that evening. The sea glowed under the fading light, soft and golden. I whispered, "They're gone now, Noel." But they left the house lighter than they found it. The wind rustled the curtains behind me, almost like a reply. In the distance, the lighthouse beam cut through the dark, steady and sure. I watched it sweep across the water again and again. I realized then that peace wasn't something you kept hidden inside four walls. It was something that shone outward, reaching anyone who needed it. The waves rolled in, patient as always, erasing the footprints from the day. I sat there until the stars came out, the sound of the ocean filling the spaces where grief used to live. It was quiet. And it was good. The next morning, the world felt still enough to hear the sea breathing. I woke before the sun, the kind of early that only happens when sleep gives way to calm. The house was quiet again. Anna and Lily's laughter just a memory now, but the quiet no longer echoed. It hummed, steady, alive. I made coffee and stepped out onto the porch. The horizon was soft pink, the sky stretched thin like silk. I pulled my shawl tighter and watched the first wave crash against the shore. There was something about mornings like this that felt like forgiveness. Not from anyone else, just from life itself. When the mail arrived later that morning, there was a letter addressed in neat handwriting I didn't recognize. I tore it open slowly. It was from the town council, an invitation to speak at a community event for seniors who'd recently moved to the area. They wanted me to share how I built a life of resilience. I almost laughed. I hadn't built it. I'd survived into it. But I said yes anyway. The event was held at the community hall a week later. A small place with folding chairs, a podium, and the smell of coffee that had been brewing since dawn. When I arrived, people greeted me with soft smiles, some holding canes, some holding hands, lives lined with quiet endurance. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't read from the paper I'd written. I looked at the faces instead, so many eyes that had seen their share of storms. I bought a house by the ocean, I began. I thought I was buying peace. But peace doesn't come with the deed. You earn it every day by choosing not to let others take it. A few people nodded, a few smiled. I continued. There was a time when I thought love meant letting people have their way, even when it hurt. But I learned that real love, the kind that lasts, doesn't ask you to disappear for someone else's comfort. The room was quiet except for the sound of a chair creaking. I saw a woman dab at her eyes with a tissue. I lost my husband a few years ago, I said. Then I almost lost my home. But in the middle of all that, I found something better than comfort. I found clarity. Someone in the back whispered, "Amen?" When I finished, there was soft applause. People came up afterward, shaking my hand, thanking me. One woman said, "You sound like someone who's made peace with herself." I smiled. I think I finally have. That evening, I came home tired but content. The ocean was glowing under the setting sun. I took off my shoes and walked straight down to the sand. The tide was gentle, the water cool around my ankles. I stood there for a long while watching the waves. My reflection shimmered on the wet sand, older, lined but steady. A gull swooped low, its cry sharp and wild. I whispered into the wind, "You'd be proud, Noel." The wind carried the words back like a promise. When I returned to the house, I lit a single candle on the dining table. The flame flickered, small but bright. I set the photo of Noel and Ethan beside it. Then I opened my notebook again. On the next page I wrote, "Peace isn't a destination. It's the decision to stay gentle in a world that isn't." That night I dreamt of the beach, not as it was before, but as it is now. My husband standing at the edge of the water, Ethan beside him, both smiling. The sky wide and open. I walked toward them, and for once, no one was leaving. When I woke, the house was filled with morning light. The clock ticked softly in the corner. I made coffee, fed the birds by the porch, and watched them scatter into the air. Later that week, Ethan called. His voice sounded lighter, steadier. "Mom," he said, "I wanted to tell you something. I met someone. Nothing serious yet, but she's kind. She reminds me of you." "That's good," I said. "Be kind back." He chuckled. "I will. I promise." Before hanging up, he said, "You know, I didn't realize how much I learned from you until now." "You learned how to rebuild," I said. "That's all that matters." When the call ended, I stood for a long time by the window, looking out over the sea. The waves rolled in and out, tireless. I thought about how far we'd come, from the noise, the betrayal, the storm, to this calm. That afternoon, I drove into town again. I stopped by the market, bought flowers for the first time in months. White lilies, like the ones Noelle used to bring home. When I got back, I placed them in a vase by the window, where the sunlight could find them. A knock came at the door just before sunset. It was Ruth, carrying a small basket of apples. "You've been hard to reach," she said, smiling. "I've been busy being happy," I said. She laughed, setting the basket on the counter. "I never thought I'd hear you say that." "Neither did I said. We sat together on the porch, eating apples and watching the waves. The air smelled of salt and sweetness. "You know," Ruth said after a while, "I think that house finally became what it was meant to be." "What's that?" "A home," she said simply. We stayed there until the stars came out, the sound of the tide soft and rhythmic. When she left, I stood alone on the porch, looking at the sea glowing under the moonlight. I whispered, "It's enough." Then I went inside, closed the door, and let the quiet hold me. The next morning, I woke to sunlight spilling across the floor. The world outside shimmered with calm. I made breakfast, humming softly. When I looked out the window, the ocean was the same as always, endless, forgiving, and alive. As I sat down with my coffee, I realized something simple. I hadn't just survived my story. I'd rewritten it. The storm had passed, and I was still here, steadfast, steady, and free. I raised my cup toward the light. "To peace," I said softly. Outside, the sea answered with another wave. The days grew shorter. The air carried the first chill of fall, and the ocean began to darken earlier each evening. I'd started wearing sweaters again, the thick ones Noelle used to tease me about. The house felt softer in the cooler air, quieter but warm. One morning, I stood on the porch watching leaves drift down the road. The dunes were dusted with gold and brown. I thought of how much had changed since the storm, the one outside and the one that had lived inside me for months. Both had passed, but they left me new. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. The lilies I'd placed by the window had started to wilt, their petals curling inward. I took one from the vase and pressed it gently between the pages of my notebook. There were so many pages now. Memories, lessons, pieces of me stitched into words. After breakfast, I walked into town for errands. The air was brisk, the wind sharp. Along the main street, shopkeepers were hanging autumn wreaths. At the bakery, Mrs. Taylor greeted me with a smile. "You always walk like you're listening to music," she said. "Maybe I am," I told her. "It's just quiet music now." She laughed. "Well, that's the best kind." When I got home, a letter was waiting in the mailbox. Ethan again. The envelope was thick this time. Inside was a photograph of him standing in front of a new building with a small sign that read Brooks Home Repairs. Underneath, he'd written, "For the house that built me." My hands shook a little as I held it. I read his note next. "Mom, I finally understand why you fought so hard for that beach house. It wasn't about property. It was about peace. I'm trying to build that for myself now. Thank you for showing me what strength really looks like." I sat down, the paper trembling softly in my hands. Tears came, quiet but steady. Not from sadness, something gentler. Relief, maybe. The kind that comes when the story turns toward healing. I placed the letter beside Noelle's photo on the mantel. For a moment, the three of us felt together again. That afternoon, Ruth called. "You sound different," she said. "Lighter." "I think I am," I said. "Ethan finally found his way." "I told you he would," she said. "Apples don't fall far, you know." "Maybe," I said. "But sometimes they roll a little before they realize where home is." She laughed softly. You always did know how to put things. When evening came, I took a walk along the shoreline. The waves brushed my ankles, cold and playful. The sky glowed orange, then purple. A few children were flying kites near the dunes, their laughter carried by the wind. One of them waved at me, a girl with curly hair and bright eyes. For a second, I thought of Lily. I waved back. When the tide began to rise, I stopped walking. The sand beneath my feet was wet and firm. I closed my eyes and let the wind wrap around me. I whispered into the air, "You were right, Noel. The sea doesn't take, it teaches." Back at the house, I made soup for dinner. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and comforting. I ate slowly, savoring the quiet. The window above the sink framed the darkening sky. Later, I lit a small fire in the living room. The crackle of the wood felt like company. I poured a cup of tea and opened my notebook again. On the next blank page, I wrote, "Every storm leaves behind driftwood, pieces of what broke, waiting to be shaped into something new." I stared at the sentence for a long time before setting down my pen. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Each sound felt steady, grounded. Life had returned to a rhythm that was neither too loud nor too still. That night, I dreamed again. This time, I was walking down the same beach, but I wasn't alone. Ethan was there, older, calm, walking beside me. Noel walked a few steps ahead, his figure faint in the morning light. He turned once, smiled, and kept walking toward the horizon until he disappeared into the sunrise. When I woke, my cheeks were wet, but my heart felt light. I knew what the dream meant. It was his way of saying goodbye, not out of distance, but peace. The next few days were filled with small, ordinary things. Cleaning the garden, fixing the loose shutter on the porch, talking to Ruth about a book we both loved. These were the days that used to feel empty. Now they felt full. One evening, as I was bringing in the laundry, the phone rang again. Ethan's voice came through, warm and sure. "Mom," he said, "I'm coming to visit next weekend. I want you to meet someone." I smiled. "Someone?" "Yes," he said. "Her name's Claire. She's kind. I think you'll like her." "I'm sure I will," I said. "And Mom," he added, his voice softer, "I'm proud of you." The words caught me off guard. "You shouldn't be," I said. "You're the one building your life now." "I am," he said, "because you showed me how." When the call ended, I sat in the dim light for a long time. The tide outside was loud again, hitting the shore like applause. I took it as a sign. That weekend, when Ethan and Claire arrived, the house came alive again. Claire brought flowers, her smile bright and open. "I've heard so much about you," she said. "I hope not all of it," I replied, and we both laughed. Ethan looked around. "It hasn't changed a bit," he said. "It doesn't need to," I said. "It knows who it is." We spent the afternoon talking, cooking, sharing stories. Claire helped set the table, her hands graceful, sure. When she reached for the salt, I noticed the ring on her finger. "You didn't tell me," I said to Ethan, smiling. He grinned sheepishly. "I wanted it to be a surprise." I laughed. The sound light and knew. "Well, you've succeeded." That night, after they'd gone to bed, I stood on the porch again. The ocean shimmered under the moon, steady as ever. I whispered, "They're all right now. We're all right." The waves answered with their slow rhythm, endless and sure. Inside, the house glowed with warmth. Soft lights, gentle air, the faint scent of dinner still lingering. For the first time, I didn't feel like a woman who'd been left behind. I felt like the keeper of something that had survived every storm. Before I went to bed, I wrote one last line in my notebook. "Strength isn't loud. It's the sound of a woman closing her door at night and knowing she is safe." Then I blew out the candle, let the darkness settle, and drifted into sleep with the ocean's lullaby carrying me through. The morning after Ethan and Claire's visit began softly. The sea was calm again, the sky brushed with pale gold. I woke to the sound of gulls and the faint hum of the waves, the kind of sound that feels like a heartbeat. The house smelled like coffee and cinnamon, the last of the rolls Claire had baked before they left. I walked through the quiet rooms, sunlight spilling through the windows. Their laughter still lingered faintly in the air, the echo of something healed. On the table sat a folded napkin with a note in Ethan's handwriting. "We'll be back soon, Mom? Thank you for everything." I held it for a long moment, smiling through the ache in my chest. Then I placed it beside Noelle's photo on the mantel, next to all the other letters that told the story of how we'd found our way back to each other. After breakfast, I went down to the beach. The tide was low, the sand smooth except for the faint marks left by the wind. I walked slowly, the water brushing my ankles. Every step left a print that disappeared moments later, carried away by the next small wave. For years, I'd been afraid of how easily things could vanish. Now, I saw it differently. The ocean didn't erase, it renewed. Each wave was both an ending and a beginning. When I reached the rocks at the edge of the cove, I stopped. This was where we'd scattered Noel's ashes. The sea shimmered in the same quiet light it had that day. I knelt, placed my hand on the wet stone, and whispered, "It's all right now. We made it." The wind rose gently, brushing against my cheek like a familiar touch. For a moment, I could almost feel him there, his steady presence, the warmth of it. Then it was gone, folded back into the air, into everything. As I walked home, the path felt lighter under my feet. The house appeared over the dune, its pale blue walls bright against the sky. I realized I'd stopped thinking of it as something I had to protect. It was simply home now, peaceful, whole, mine. That afternoon, Ruth came by again. She carried a basket of apples and a mischievous grin. "You're hosting Thanksgiving this year," she declared. I laughed. "Am I?" "Don't argue," she said. "Ethan already called me. He and Claire are coming down. He said you'll pretend to protest, then agree anyway." I shook my head, smiling. He knows me too well. When Thanksgiving arrived, the house filled with warmth and noise again. But this time, it felt right. Ethan carved the turkey while Claire set the table with my old china. Ruth told stories that made everyone laugh until they cried. The sound of life filled every corner, not like an intrusion, but like music returning to a familiar tune. After dinner, as the others washed dishes and packed leftovers, I slipped outside. The sky was deep and clear, full of stars. The ocean shimmered darkly, silver edges curling along the shore. I thought about all the seasons this house had seen, storms and silence, loss and laughter, betrayal and forgiveness. Each one had shaped it, just as they'd shaped me. Ethan came out a moment later, 2 mugs of cocoa in hand. He handed me one and leaned against the porch railing. "Claire loves it here," he said. "She says it feels like time slows down." "That's what peace does," I said. "It doesn't rush you." He looked out toward the sea. "You know, I used to think peace was something you find, but it's something you build, isn't it?" "It is," I said. "You build it the same way you build trust, by keeping promises, even to yourself." He nodded. "You did that, Mom. So did you." For a while, we just stood there, listening to the waves. The night air was cool, filled with the scent of pine and salt. The same ocean that once carried my grief now carried something gentler, a rhythm I could live with. When Ethan went back inside, I stayed. I wanted to hold that moment a little longer. The porch light glowed behind me, casting a warm halo over the steps. From inside, I could hear laughter again, Ruth teasing Claire, the clatter of dishes, the hum of a home full of life. And then, just beneath all of it, I heard something else. The faint rush of waves against the shore, the pulse that had carried me through every chapter of this life. I closed my eyes. For a moment, the years folded in on themselves. I saw myself as I had been, standing in this same place when everything felt lost. And then, like a tide returning, I saw everything that had followed. The storm, the silence, the rebuilding, the long road back to myself. I whispered, "Thank you," not to anyone in particular, but to the whole of it. To the pain, the lessons, the mercy of time. The wind answered softly, brushing my hair from my face. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked through the house one last time. The lights were low, the fire burning down to embers. I paused by the mantel, looking at the photos. The family I'd raised, the man I'd loved, the life we'd built. I touched the frame gently and said, "We're home, Noel." Then I turned off the lamp and went to bed. The next morning, the world was quiet again. The sun broke over the horizon, spilling gold across the sea. The tide moved in and out, patient as breath. I poured my coffee and stepped onto the porch, the wood cool beneath my bare feet. The air was crisp, the kind that clears your head and fills your lungs. Out on the water, a small boat drifted past, its sails white against the blue. I watched it for a while, until it disappeared beyond the curve of the bay. Then I looked down at the sand. The wind had smoothed it clean, erasing the footprints from the day before. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to leave a mark. I sat down, sipped my coffee, and let the morning unfold. The ocean murmured softly, the gulls cried overhead, and the house stood steady behind me, unchanged, unafraid. Everything I'd lost, everything I'd learned had brought me here, to this still, simple moment. Peace didn't feel like victory. It felt like rest, and as the waves rolled in again, I whispered one final time, "I'm home." The tide answered, steady and sure, and the world went on, gentle, endless, whole.